So let's make this official. Sara Curry, welcome to Yoga Talks with Yoga Factory Online.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see everybody.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Good. So you own Blaze Yoga and Pilates in Portsmouth.
I do. Yeah, I've owned the studio for 17 years.
17 years. That's crazy. So you went to your first teacher training, your 500
I'm sorry,
hour,
16 years. Yeah.
your 500 hour cert was in 2003, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then how quickly after that did you open your studio?
I actually bought an existing studio. It was a kind of a silly circumstance. Not silly. A year after I came out of training, I knew I had to own a studio if I was going to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And I came down to sort of check out the Seacoast area and had been looking at real estate in Manchester, New Hampshire. And we found a really great space. The parking wasn't awesome. And the realtor was like, hey, celebrate, have a great night, you guys. Like, we'll put some money down on it tomorrow. And I left feeling like really anxious and upset and like had a sick feeling in my stomach. And my husband was like, let's just drive over to Portsmouth and we'll take class from Nicole. We'll meet her. She's gonna be your neighbor. I was living in Vermont at the time. So I took her class and I said, hey, I'm thinking about opening in Manchester. Is that cool? And she was like, yeah, it's totally cool. And it's gonna sound like a weird question, but would you rather just buy this studio? So that was it. She'd been open for about a year and yeah, that was all she wrote.
Nice. So that was like a year into teaching for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like a year and a week.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was getting into.
You knew right away that you wanted to be an owner.
Yeah. I mean, I was teaching at like 4 different studios. One studio, I drove an hour and a half there and back to make $50. I mean, my back hurt. I was using a ton of gas. It was back when gas was $5 a gallon.
Yeah.
And I just knew that that wasn't sustainable, but I also knew I didn't want to go back to my previous career. I didn't want to like work in an office. And so I was like, the only way I think I can see forward to make this work would be to own a studio.
Mm-hmm. I was reading in your bio, it said that you found yoga after sort of a lifetime of contact sports and weightlifting. And it left you with this sort of debilitating back pain.
Yeah, I definitely did not take care of my body growing up. I played a ton of sports. And then I spent 6 years playing rugby, which was, torn biceps, all that stuff that happens. And I ended up with spinal stenosis and herniated discs. And
That's
a fellow
pretty brutal
coworker.
Sport.
It's really intense. I mean, I loved it. I loved playing it. I could never play it again, because it is so intense and just, you have to completely ignore how your body feels. So taking a yoga class was like the absolute flip of that,
Right.
and really taught me how to use my body in a way that was not damaging to it and to pay attention to how I felt and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Coworker suggested I try it and I ended up like being able to heal my pain from herniated discs just by practicing the yoga.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's the case with a lot of yoga teachers. We find that yoga can really help us so much. It like heals us, or we get out of pain. And there's a desire to sort of share that with other people because it's sort of delivered you from a place of great distress, I guess.
Yeah, I think too, when we look at like our peers who are still in the biz after all these years, it's usually people with some story like that. And it doesn't need to be physical pain. I mean, it helped me heal from trauma and emotional pain and depression and anxiety, all those things, whether your story is, an injury that you were able to rehab or an eating disorder that you came to terms with. We all have these amazing stories of recovery and healing that's why yoga is so powerful. And that's why people want to carry it forward in such a strong way.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I agree. How soon after you started practicing did you go to a teacher training?
A year and a half.
Okay. So
I was
quickly.
like 2 months in, I was like, this is what I'm doing with my life. But I didn't have any money. So I had to I got a second job. I cocktailed at night. I saved money for training.
Yep. I was kind of the same when I started practicing in San Francisco. I found out there was a teacher training and I was like, sign me up. I'm going right now. And my studio owner they had to be like, no, you have to wait. You have to have at least 6 or 8 months under your belt before you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but I felt so strongly about it that I needed to go do that.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Mhm. Nice. Um, so your studio opened in 2003, or you bought the studio in 2003. Um, and then you've sort of just been up there in New Hampshire, just kind of plugging along, doing your thing. I I'm always in. I have great respect for all the communications. Like you send out this amazing newsletter that's like a blog all the time, and your videos that you do on Facebook are always really like, I'm just like, oh, Sarah's got a new video, I have to watch it. And you actually have a TED talk that you did on yoga and recovery.
Yeah, that was one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. If you ever have a chance to do a TED talk, they're so amazingly supportive and walk you through the steps of the process. I mean, when you see TED talks, like they're really good. It's not because those people are born particularly amazing at public speaking. It's because they teach you like how to do an incredible job. There's so much support around it. It was really an amazing experience to be a part of. And I actually got to speak that day with the executive producer. She spoke right before me of the Colbert Report. And we were backstage together, and I was like going to sneak away and do some pranayama because was nervous. And she was like a wreck. She was shaking to bits and shaking to pieces. And I was like, oh my God, like this woman is like professionally in show business. And I feel like a lot more calm than she does. You know, it was one of those moments that I was like, everybody is truly the same.
Yeah.
I do love producing content. And I think in our field, I mean, you could make 10 videos a day about different things, your toes, your this posture, your back. The content is endless,
So
and
much.
people want it and they want to eat it up.
Yeah.
But the yoga recovery one, TED talk that I was able to be a part of was, in part, they picked the talk because it was the result of this exploratory study we did on yoga and recovery, just to see if there was a correlation in reduction in symptoms. And we had such an amazing response. Now, if you're not like a statistician, an exploratory study is not, it's not peer reviewed, it's not blind in any way. This is not official statistics, but it is a good indicator of like, should this continue to be studied? And we did it shortly before the mass general depression study started, and we had the same exact result. And that is a peer-reviewed double-blind study that's actually happening about depression and anxiety, which are two major symptoms of post-acute withdrawal symptoms from recovering from addiction.
And their
And
study is on the effects of yoga on depression.
yeah,
Yeah.
and when they first presented, I think it was 2.5 years in the study, it's actually ongoing, but they saw a really drastic and negative correlation between numbers of classes practiced and symptoms. So what that means is the more you practice, the less depressed you are. And that's exactly what we saw. We measured depression, anxiety, apathy, irritability, emotional overreaction, sleeplessness, social connectedness and stuff. And we saw the same thing. We saw on average a reduction in intensity of the symptoms between 67 and like 89%, like
Wow.
massive, you know.
Wow.
So people that were having severe symptoms that were barely registering on mild.
And that's recovery from alcohol,
It was
from
everything. Whereas people that
everything.
were on all different types, and all different, for us, all different phases of recovery. So like we had one person that was still drinking when they started. We had one person who had been sober for 22 years. And we had everything on the spectrum. People who were still taking benzos to come off of, heroin and opioids. So, and obviously it was supported by professionals who were monitoring their progress and making sure they were safe to practice. I'm not saying go do this at your studio and have somebody detox off heroin in your studio.
Right. Yeah.
But so it was across all measures, and amazingly, like there were a few aberrations, but most people's symptoms were similar and most people's responses were also similar. You know, we had one rando result out of all of the results where an individual who had a good bit of sobriety under their belt started to do the work, and we were doing group therapy with expressive arts. And that individual actually had a huge increase in depression because he had like unroofed a bunch of pain by practicing more and meeting with the group. So, you know, it's not a salve, be all end all salve for everything.
Sure. And that's probably stuff that should be worked through anyway.
Right.
It's one of the things that yoga, a mindfulness practice does. It sort of like makes you more aware of the stuff that you've buried down deep.
Yeah. And it's amazing how you keep, as you practice longer, you keep coming to another layer and another
Totally.
layer that surely 10 years ago you couldn't have dealt with it, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. The new layers, they sort of reveal themselves as you're ready.
Right. The thing I would just say in terms of the practice and mindfulness practices that is so powerful, and not just for recovery, but for whatever, is that they can be applied whenever you need them.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Just like you'd take a PRN drug, you need that support every day. You can go to class every day. You know, you're feeling down, you can get in there and be around people. And even if you feel a smidge better, it's anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the model of AA. There's meetings everywhere in the world. If you need a meeting, you can get to one. Same with the practice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Your background is it agricultural engineering?
It's plant and soil science. I majored in plant and soil science with a minor in sustainable ag and community development and applied economics. I intended fully to be an organic farmer when I graduated from college.
Nice.
Yep.
Do you ever, I mean, do you farm like in
Yes.
all of your spare time?
Well, it's taken us time, obviously, to build. First of all, you have to have land, so there's one thing.
Sure.
It's taken us time to build it, but yeah, we've got a little operational farm going on here.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I think especially now, when the food chain is sort of like in question, that's something that's like more and more people are starting to think about that. Like, can I grow my own food? Should I grow my own food?
Yeah. I mean, the place where we get a lot of our supplies has had like no chickens this year because everyone's like, where's the supply going to be? All these small homesteaders are starting to raise chickens,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, smart. Um, but that, I think we've talked about that before, how your sort of science background has carried over into your yoga practice and your teaching. And um, you are like so very meticulous about everything that you research and study and talk about. You've been to some of our Yoga Factory teacher trainings to do presentations, and um, you like talking about the body, and it's all very well thought out and in depth. Um, your yoga and recovery, your TED talk, that sort of carried over into your like your sober yogis program, or maybe they were sort of like one and the same.
Yeah, the TED Talk came out after the first round of Sober Yogis, and Sober Yogis was something that especially in hot yoga, there are a tremendous amount of people that practice who are in recovery. It just is how it is. And I think that the intensity of the practice and that euphoric feeling you get afterward, and the fact that it is really a balm for all of the post-acute withdrawal syndrome symptoms, I think is what draws people to it. And I really always felt this strong drive to reach out more to that community and to interact with them more, but like I didn't really know how to do it. And I also knew that like I didn't have the skills to be able to support people. I don't have the skills to know if it's safe. You know, maybe you don't know this, but you can't detox from alcohol in the hot room. You could die. It's the worst place that you could be. You would probably think like, sure, I'm going to quit drinking. I'm going to go to hot yoga and sweat it all out, which is like so I wanted to make sure that we were making good choices and supporting people where they actually needed supports, because while yoga is amazing and a wonderful addition to a recovery program, somebody that needs an inpatient program should not be at my studio, you know.
Yeah.
So I just happened to meet a student who was super passionate about the yoga and had been a recovery therapist for 27 years. And we just started like sort of jiving about how we could combine her work and my work. And one of the things that was so amazing is that as a practitioner of the yoga, she did a really good job with the folks. So the folks in Sober Yogis are practitioners and they attend group therapy sessions with Barb. She's able to talk to them about like what's happening to them in the room, you know, where
Yeah.
we had people like go back to their therapist and say like, I felt like I couldn't breathe, or I was so tired afterward, I went home and took a nap. And the therapist would say things like, well, that's dangerous,
Hmm.
or whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And so to have someone who actually knew what was going on physically in the body, what the practice is about, and what's happening in terms of sobriety, that was a huge help. And so we hatched this plan to get a group of folks together to start practicing together and going to therapy. And it ended up being really powerful. One of our first groups that we started in 2015, when we started the program, they still meet every week.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So
the front page of your website has a quote on it. It says, now more than ever, we need the stabilizing practices of yoga, meditation, and exercise in our lives. So just sort of tying that into sort of the recovery, what happens sort of physically in the body when we meditate and when we do yoga. Like, why is it important? Like, everybody is sort of disrupted right now or out of our normal schedule routine. Some of us might be worried or scared. Why is it more important right now? What does yoga physically do to us?
Oh, that's such a good question. And the thing about what's happening right now to everybody is that it really is the uncertainty, because you don't know what's going to happen. And even folks that still have jobs and they're able to pay their rent, you don't know if this is going to last until November, and then you won't. There's all these things going on. And so there's a lot to think about or be worried about. And all of that is tremendously stressful and causes this massive stress response in the body. And mindfulness practices like yoga are so good because the work is to be present in the present moment. Because right now, I'm not in danger. I'm safe, I'm warm, I have food, you know what I mean? All of those things, but I could very easily sit here and start to spin out of control about everything that's happening or what people are doing or not doing and who's being safe and what's going to happen. And, I really think, and hot yoga is so powerful because it's such an intense physical sensation, but we're so up here as a culture, the way that we interact on the internet and the access to information. And especially now, I think people are probably consuming a lot more online content than ever
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
that we can live in the future and the past all the time. And that's a heightened state of anxiety. And while we feel like we know what stress is, it affects all of this stuff. It affects our blood sugar levels, our insulin resistance, the health and vibrancy of our gut bacteria, the production of hormones, whether or not we ovulate. All this stuff that's happening is negatively affected by stress. And so if we can do this in practice to get ourselves we know that the practice of yoga takes you out of a stressed state. So when you look at the research out there, like people who practice yoga 45 minutes, 3 times a week, this was a study done in California in 2001, who practiced for 12 weeks, had a 31% reduction in cortisol production in their bodies compared to people who did stuff like outdoor walks and going to therapy. So like people that were moving or doing practices that you believe would be helpful. But this is so powerful. And I think especially like if you take the conditions of the hot room, and I know everybody can't access that right now, but there are so many things to distract you. Yet if you allow yourself to engage in that stuff, the person next to you smells the sweat that feels like a spider, whatever it is that's going on, you'll lose your balance and fall down. Or you'll lose control of your breathing and you won't be able to stand up because you'll get dizzy. It just makes you, we need this very physical practice with strong sensations to pull us back into our body, because the body is always present, right? The body's only happening right now. This heartbeat, this breath, whatever it would be, this muscle contraction. And so for us to tune our minds into like a physical sensation in the body is one of the simplest ways for like your average Joe to be able to meditate. You can't just tell people you need to go meditate. Go sit still. They can't do it. I mean, 2 years ago, a New York Times best-selling novel was, I can't think of the title of it, but it was How to Meditate for 60 Seconds. This guy had written this amazing book about how like meditating for 10 minutes a day was great. He writes the book, nobody buys it. Because nobody can meditate for 10 minutes a day, and so he wrote this book that like you can do it for 60 seconds, and it was a New York Times bestseller. So it just speaks to like the crazy way that we live and how much we need this deeply grounding practice. And the other part about it is there's a ton of other stuff that happens when we move our bodies like this. I mean, there's so much, like palpation's one of my favorite words, but there's so much palpation that happens to your tissues, to your cell walls, to your interstitial spaces, to your lymph nodes, to your circulatory system. And that movement, contraction, compression, and palpation actually makes all the systems in your body work better. So it's like you've got this incredible body that's going to do all these amazing things to keep you alive. And you're like, hey, guess what? I'm going to give you even more than you need. Like, go out there and shine. So in a state where the stress in our lives is depressing the function of all these things, we're using the yoga to boost ourselves back up so that things are functioning well.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much there to unpack. That's
and we could talk about this for another 5 hours.
totally. Yeah. If only we had the time. I was talking to Martha Williams from Minneapolis a couple weeks ago on YogaTalks, and she was talking about how even like all the arteries in our bodies actually have muscle wall around them, and like even down to the smallest one, like all the way down in the tip of your finger or something. And how when we move, when we stretch, because some people think yoga is just, stretching. But when we stretch, we're actually stretching and making that muscle wall move and get stronger. So, and when our heart beats, it's not just the heart that's moving blood through our system. It's all of those arteries throughout our entire body. So when we think about like moving our body in a yoga class, when we feel a stretching sensation, it's not just, the muscles stretching. Like we think of like our bicep or our thigh or something.
Yeah.
It's all the way down to that very minute, the muscle wall and the artery that.
It's so true. And the science supports it. I mean, if you go to Pure Action, Yoga is Medicine, you can read their study they did on hot yoga and arterial health. And they saw massive improvements in elasticity and responsiveness of those arterial muscles in people who practice hot yoga.
Yep.
I mean, it's we're not just like talking out of the corners of our mouths. The research really shows that this is literally happening, and so many other processes happen. I mean, there are processes in your body that don't happen if you don't take your cell wall and stretch it. Like, helps to move materials out of your cells so that it can be carried away to your liver or your bladder or whatever it would be. It seems like you're doing a stretch, and stretching's nice, but you're actually like in a very, very deep way supporting the intrinsic function of your body.
Yeah. Yep. I think years ago, there wasn't a lot of research to support that. So it was just sort of like, we know something's good happening, something good is happening, but we're not quite sure. And it's so great now to see that research being done and to start to really understand what's going on in the body.
Yeah. And, if you look at like the top risk factors right now for COVID, it's diabetes, heart disease. I mean, these are all things that there's literal research on how this particular hot yoga helps to improve both of those things.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
And all the work we do with breathing, like just increasing lung capacity and the health of the lungs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that I texted you last week and was like, I got to get Sara on the show, was because you actually posted a little video on your Facebook about your 4, what did you call them? The keys to drive home your practice. And I wanted to ask you about that because I thought it was very intriguing, and maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that today, because I think some people are really finding it difficult to get motivated, not just, to get on their yoga mat and do a practice, but just to get motivated in general right now.
Totally. And, there's a bit of that comes from inertia, that we're in less motion. We're not flying around and getting stuff done. It is difficult to get yourself going again. It takes more energy to get going than it does to stay going, you know? So that's totally real. And there's also this piece of like what's happening now that we have got to give ourselves grace and room to be tired, take naps, be stressed. You know what I mean? So there's that piece of it. But we've been running this program at our studio called Commit to 90 for about 8 years. And it's a 90-day program where we ask people to commit to taking 4 classes a week. And every week there is a chunk of content. It may be about meditation. It may be about like what kind of fat you should eat or whatever it would be, fueling your practice and all those type of things. And the first few times we ran it, I was like really befuddled because like half the people fell off within 4 weeks. And so I started to do some more research about like, how do you get people to build habits? What are the best ways? What are the best approaches? Because when people would say to me something like, I just can't motivate to get myself to the studio. What should I do? I mean, I can't answer that question for anybody. That's not my problem. You know what I mean? That's not for my personality type. I have decided that yoga is important. I will do it every day. That's it. There's like no discussion. And my friend Erin Holt recommended that I take Gretchen Rubin's personality types test? I can't quite remember
I
the
looked it up.
total of it.
The 4 tendencies quiz.
4 tendencies, that's it. The 4 tendencies. And I thought that I was going to be like a rebel or a questioner. There's rebel, questioner, obliger, and upholder if you haven't taken it yet. And I assumed I'd be a rebel or a questioner because I'm like, I don't believe in that, I'm not doing it, or you know what I mean? Sort of like my whole whatever. The answer I got was upholder. And I was like, I'm not an upholder. I don't just do what I'm told. And I figured you were going to be Angelica. That's so funny. But then I started reading about what upholders' tendencies are, and it was like spot on. And I'll tell you, you have to go and follow up because she has a podcast. The podcast is about a lot of different things, but there is a podcast, at least one, on every single tendency. And she started talking about like how upholders would like, okay, so have you guys read the 4 Agreements?
Yeah.
The book? Okay. I couldn't finish it. And I finish everything. Like if I watch a movie that I hate, I will watch it till the end because I started it and I'm going to finish it. But I started reading that book and I got to the part where they were talking about always do more than your fair share. And so I was like pulling my car over on the road and like jumping out to grab trash, pick trash up off the side of it. And I was like, okay, this is the type of stuff I can't, like if I think this is important, I'm going to do it. And then there's something for upholders that's called the tightening. So you're like, oh yeah, I'm always doing more than my fair share. But then I'm like, but does that mean I should be doing more than my fair share? You know what I mean? So it's tighter and tighter, more intense. So for an upholder, when it comes to something like getting motivated, you're just going to make a plan and you're going to do it. And that's that. For an obliger tendency, that's somebody who's much more motivated by relationships with other people. Now, these aren't perfect. You might smudge between 1 or 2 of them, but it's just a good way to get your brain around like what's going to motivate you. So people say things like having some kind of, like an obligation to someone else so that you have accountability. Accountability, I do not care. Jeb, I don't care if you know if I'm going to yoga or not. It doesn't matter to me. It's up to me. But for an obliger, you're much more likely to show up if you have a friend who's going to text you at 10 and be like, did you take the 9 a.m. today? And what we found in the Commit to 90 group is it was perfect for obligers. Because they had a group, there were people that they were reaching out to when they weren't doing stuff. That'd be like, who's going to the 4:30? I will meet you there. That's the type of support an obliger needs. You need to have you feel like you're letting somebody down if you don't show up for them. So then you've got a questioner tendency where you're not going to do it unless you have the fact. You're not going to do it because I said do it. You're going to do it because you did your research, you got the information you needed about why it's important for you during COVID to practice yoga. You know what I mean? So it's important for questioners to know that about themselves and not say like, I'm going to do booty yoga because Joe told me to, because you're not. A questioner is not going to do that. A questioner needs to do the research about booty yoga to find out why booty yoga is the #1 way to cope with COVID before they're going to bother practicing. Yeah. And Nikki, I'm sure Nikki is a questioner. I'm sure that the same happened for you around the yoga. You figured out why it was important and why it worked for you before you made that commitment to it. Anyway, and then you've got your rebel tendency. And I feel sorry for you rebels because a rebel is always going to do it on their own way. And it's no one is going to tell you how to get motivated to do your practice. It's going to B, for whatever reasons for you, you get motivated to this. So it's important, if that's your sort of feel, is that like, so I'll say to my son, like, okay, we're gonna do some chores. Can you go out and get the eggs? And he will run in the opposite direction. You know, that's his thing. We have to create a situation where it's important for him to get the eggs done before we do X activity that he's interested in.
Yeah.
It's not because he's a jerk, it's because that's his personality. So if you know that about yourself, then doing research where you talk to other rebels about how they get themselves motivated is really important. And this is the thing where we get on the internet and you see like somebody cured their heart disease by drinking celery juice, and you think that you should just start juicing celery every day. And then Sarah can't make soup because there's no celery in the grocery stores, right? So
I have a
that
feeling
doesn't
that
mean,
actually happened.
oh my God, it was like, no joke, it was like 18 months around here that happened, you know, about 2 years ago. There was no celery in the grocery store. You couldn't actually literally not get it.
Yeah.
Because it was, you know, whatever it cures, Epstein-Barr, or I don't know. Anyway, so now it's avocados. But it's important to know that your reasons you can't motivate are really about you and who you are and how you work. And just because somebody like me gets on there and said, I made a decision and I'm going to, are you watching the video too? He's taking a nice nap and staring. I didn't even realize he was there. It doesn't make a difference if I say I'm just going to go, because that's not who you are. So like, just sort of knowing that how you function is different than other people is helpful, because then don't try on something that's not your thing.
It's so helpful. Yeah.
I don't want to make a date with somebody to go to yoga and then have them text me that they're not coming. I'm going to be so mad, you know?
It takes away some of the frustration. Like, how can they just go and do something like that when it takes me so much effort, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's also important to recognize in this time period for all of us that this is very different. Change is really hard. And a lot of people have a lot of grief around what's going on.
Yeah.
Sadness, fear, anxiety, grief. And it's very difficult to motivate it and to motivate and to get action happening when you feel like that. The key to it, though, is that we know that this practice alleviates symptoms of depression. So if you can get yourself over the hump, it doesn't matter how you feel or how long you practice, you are going to feel at least a little bit better if you can get yourself to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
And we were talking before the yoga talk, we were just chatting a little bit, and we were saying how, you know, you might not have time for a 90-minute practice every day right now, or the ability to heat up your room or whatever. But even if you can do like a 10-minute practice or a 20 or 30-minute practice, your body is going to react. You're going to start to feel better.
Yeah, it's so true. And actually, if you look at the research on habit building, so habit is something that you do without thinking about it. You get up in the morning and you brush your teeth, or you make your tea, or whatever it is that you do. You don't have to expend mental energy. And we develop habits as humans because we're always trying to conserve energy. That's like our number one. We don't want to waste calories because what if the famine comes? So habits are just the things that need to get done. They're the things that we do. Our brain does this for us to conserve energy. So it's not effort for you to wake up in the morning and think, today, am I going to brush my teeth or am I not going to brush my teeth? But when it comes to habit building, you want to be able to get your practice and not think about it. When it comes to habit building, almost all of us go too big and fail. And if you go big and you fail, it is another reminder. So it's a dopamine depressant. So it doesn't stimulate you to do it again, to set another goal and try to do it again. So we don't want to set yourself up to fail. You know, that's a biochemical response inside your body. So it really is critical that you set yourself reasonable expectations. I mean, I think a lot of us had the expectation that we were going to come into quarantine and be homeschooling our children and working from home and doing a 90-minute practice every day. Totally unreasonable, right? Definitely not going to happen. So it's important to scale that back and to say, like, maybe you can't even concentrate for that long. And you're not a bad person if you jump on the Zoom and you do 15 minutes of the class and you have to just shut it off and go. But so when they do research about setting goals, especially around like movement and stuff, it's set yourself a goal that you cannot fail at. So one woman was trying to exercise to lose weight, and what her a coach that she was working with had her do was every single night pack a bag and for her with her gym stuff, and every single morning put it in her car. And when she got home from work, take it out of her car, unpack it, have dinner, do whatever she was going to do for the night, and then pack the bag up again and put it in her car. No going to the gym, no going for a walk, no using the equipment, because she couldn't fail at that. And when that was something that she could do, she was allowed to go to the gym, go inside, change into her workout clothes, exercise for 5 minutes. Even if she wanted to stay longer, she had to go home. So you can't fail at that. And so what she found was she wanted to go, she wanted to stay longer, she wanted to do more stuff. And that's how she made it into a habit. It wasn't like she was going to get out of work and be like, shoot, I don't have my workout stuff, I'm going home. She'd built the habit, like brushing her teeth, that she brings her workout stuff to work every single day. You know, and that's the piece, whatever it's going to be for you. If you are a get up in the morning and do, you know, half moon, back bend, forward bend, a couple of lunges and a camel, and then you go and sit at your computer, start there, you know.
Right. Totally. So back to your 4 keys to drive your home practice. The first key is sort of understanding your tendency from this quiz, right?
Yeah.
And
for
then
sure.
Where do we go from there?
That's great. That's great. So understand yourself, set attainable goals, set yourself up, like get your space prepped. Don't expect that you're going to wake up, set your alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning. You're going to wake up and find your yoga mat and drag it out and change it into something. You need to do everything you possibly can. Like if you're somebody who wants a humidifier and a space heater, put it out, fill the humidifier, you know, pull out a yoga outfit, set your mat on the floor. If you're doing a, you know, Pilates class with bands, put the bands out, get yourself in a situation that you're removing every single obstacle that you possibly can from your capacity to show up. So that as you walk to make your coffee in the morning, you see the mat is there, it is waiting for you, it's ready, you know. Nice. And the other piece is when you do it, instead of practicing in your pajamas, put your clothes on, like show up, you know, not far off from that dress for the job you want thing. The first day that I stayed home with my kids to homeschool, we were still live streaming at the studio. So I jumped on the live stream. I was going to take the 11 a.m. class. And I was in my PJs. They were like kind of falling off my butt when I bent over. You know, it was a irritating circumstance. And then I'm like sweating in my pajamas. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to wash these. It was just all these little things that I didn't show up for the practice like I would have showed up if I put a yoga outfit on and got ready to do it. You know, it seems like one more thing, but it really, you wouldn't go and play basketball in a snowsuit.
Right.
You know, you need to be wearing stuff that's going to make yourself feel good. When you're doing down dog, if you didn't put a bra on, you're going to be uncomfortable, you know.
I don't,
unless you're from France.
No. That's a really good point. So those are your four kind of.
I think so. I'd have to look back at the video.
Yeah, no, I think you hit them. So understand yourself.
Set attainable
goals.
Prep.
Set up, prep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
show up.
And then show up and get dressed.
Yeah.
You know, like actually like make it serious. And I think those last two, like sometimes that's where we end up not failing, that's not the right word, but that's where we go sort of sideways. Mm-hmm. Having a space that's actually not just, you know, your yoga mat and your towel or your bands or whatever, but like, can you set up a space that has as few distractions as possible?
Right. And don't bring your phone.
Right, exactly. Practicing at home, sometimes you might not have, like, your kids might be there, your pets might be there. Like, there are things that we can't avoid. But yeah, like, can you turn your phone off? Mm-hmm. Can you take off your iWatch? Yep. Can you set up a space that, like, for the next 30 or 60 or however long minutes, you actually have that time to yourself to actually practice? Yeah,
we did a survey this week and we asked people what were the biggest challenges they're having with their at-home practice. And motivation was number one, which makes sense. You know, not having the heat was a big one, but for a lot of people, it was like pets, kids, I don't have time. And this is the same thing that we heard before COVID ever happened. This was the same reason people couldn't show up to the studio. And this is a piece that like I feel super passionate about, right? Especially for women. Like women have to be super moms. You're doing for everybody. I'm so busy I can't eat, or oh, I passed out in class because I haven't eaten since 6 a.m. All this stuff. And there's always a reason that somebody else needs you. And this is the key. Nobody is going to give you this time. Nobody's going to stay. Your kids aren't going to stay away from you. The cats aren't going to stay off your mat. Your phone is going to keep ringing. There is never going to be time for you unless you fight for it. You know, your partner may want to be doing something with you or have your help with something. You are going to have to fight and set boundaries with people and have limitations. And it may actually be a conversation that you have with your family where you say, hey, listen, this is really important for my mental health. I need this in my life. When we did Commit to 90, we had a student who did it 4 times. And right about like 4 to 8 weeks into it, she would quit. And every reason, my kids need me, it's too busy, the kids' schedules, blah, blah, blah. The 4th time she did it, I was like, I'm actually not going to give up on you this time. You've said this to me 4 years in a row. What if you went home and had a conversation? Her kids were like, you're always at yoga. Now she's always at yoga 3 nights a week and 1 day on the weekends. That's not always at yoga, I will say that. But they were like, you never cook us dinner and blah, 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 blah. So she felt guilty because she's a mom and she wants to take care of her kids. And I said, what if, I'm going to push back and make you a little uncomfortable here. What if you sat down with them and said, this is important to me. I've never finished because I'm always doing for my family. I really want to complete this just for myself to be able to do this. Like, could you help me with dinner? Would you come to class with me? And the friggin' kids started practicing with her. 4 weeks, they came to 2 classes a week with her, and 2 nights a week they made dinner. You know, these are kids that she was like, they won't do anything. They won't empty the dishwasher. And she asked, and it was important to her, and they did it. So when it comes to that type of stuff, you have to, as Trent Shelton says, you have to protect your peace. And that means that you turn your phone to do not disturb and put it in the other room. Like, I know people need you, and you're like, kind of want to be distracted from that annoying posture by like, ooh, what does that text message say? But you deserve this, you know, and you have to put the walls up around your peace and your private and your personal time, because no one is going to do it for you. So like, you've got to decide, I matter. The time I have to myself is important. And that's not easy for a lot of us to say.
Right.
My priorities are important.
Right. And then the last one, you know, just like you were saying, like, show up, get dressed. Like, it's so easy to not do the, like, you know, show up in your PJs or your sweatsuit or whatever. Like, you know, find some clothes that, you know, they might not be like little yoga booty shorts because the room's not quite as hot, but like clothes that you can move in, that you feel comfortable in, that you can sweat in. And yeah,
and
like,
maybe that you feel good about yourself in.
yeah,
You know, there are people that, like, we did a live sale at the studio a couple of weeks ago, and there were people that were like, I need an outfit that's going to inspire me to get on my mat. Whatever it takes for you, do it. If you've been like practicing at home on the carpet and it's really scratchy, get yourself a yoga mat. Like, treat yourself to that. You deserve to like be comfortable and have what you need to do your practice. And that's another way to show up. And if you're somebody who hasn't shown up for yourself, or you haven't shown up for your practice, like, you can become someone who shows up. You know, we are the people who show up. And when we show up, we change the world.
yep. There's it's a Yogananda quote, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's something like, a person that can reform themselves can reform thousands.
Right. 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 You're not going to change the world in your pajamas.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't eat, or you know, are so stressed out you can't cope and you can't sleep at night. I mean, that's to me like the whole thing about owning the yoga studio. It took me a long time to hone my focus in and get it. Like, I know I can't solve global warming. It's not my expertise, but I can help the people that are going to solve global warming. I can help them feel their best and think their best and be their smartest and be able to show up in the biggest way so that they can do it. You know, that's the work that I feel like we have to do, because people who are in pain, you are not as present, as smart, as talented a singer or an artist or whatever it is when you're not feeling your number one, when you're not sleeping at night. And that's another thing. A lot of people right now are struggling because of stress with sleep. I mean, that's what yoga is for.
Yep.
It is for helping you sleep, you know,
to balance the internal systems of the body so you can sleep. Yeah. I think too, a lot of people probably are on their devices so much that those things interfere with your sleep cycle. Like if you're sitting in front of a screen all the time. So another good reason to be able to put it aside for a little while and, do a yoga class, do a meditation, whatever it is.
Right. Right. Totally. Pull yourself back into the actual world that's happening and the people who are in front of you.
Yeah. It's another.
So Tom, did you take the test? Tom said the Zoom classes are the only ones that keep him accountable. Did you take the personalities tendencies? And are you an obliger? That's my question.
He took it.
Aha! Isn't that amazing? So Tom is an obliger. He wants to show up for the Zoom classes. And it's funny that you say that. That's now, that's the way you're going to get to practice is if that's when the class is and you've got to show up.
Yep. And our studio has actually added more of the Zoom classes as we've been going on through this process. Just because it's nice to see people's faces, but there is that accountability as well. And we feel it teaching as well as I think the people that are practicing on the other end.
For sure.
It's just nice to have that interpersonal connection. We're sort of together even though we're apart.
It's wild, isn't it? We did a Zoom right in the beginning to help people figure out how to get online and access classes. And 50 people showed up and it was mostly chit-chatting. A little bit of me sharing my screen, but it was mostly just hey, there's other people out there, we have common interests.
So fun. So you said you're an obliger. So you just sort of get up and go. You just
an upholder, yes.
Upholder,
if I think it's important,
it'll
get done. That's it. And that's part of why, you were saying that you like my content, because I'm this is an idea, I will do it.
Yeah. I haven't finished the quiz yet. I started it, but then I had to set up the Zoom meeting. I have a feeling I'm either that or a rebel or somewhere in between, but I'll have to.
I was guessing a rebel or a questioner for you. That would be my guess. Not that you don't get stuff done, because you do. But the thing about it is the power behind a questioner or a rebel is once you believe it's important to you, you're going to go at it whole hog.
You just have to figure out the why. Yeah.
Totally.
So being an upholder and just, sort of being aware of yourself, what is it that keeps you going? What motivates you? How do you just, I'm going to go do that thing?
I would say I feel a moral obligation to impact the world in as positive a way as possible. That's just the way I think that Angelica and Myra, I think you're right. I think he's a rebel. But that's it. And I also have low impulse control. So I sit on a board of a nonprofit that provides yoga to at-risk communities in my area. And somebody will come with an idea and I'm like, yes, let's go. Let's do it. And it's been a real process because it's a very, very processy group of people who like to consider the implications and what would the budget be and how are people going to feel about it? How do we think the community would receive it? And I'm like, this is a great idea. Let's just do it. And they're like, thank you for being here and pushing us to take risks. And I've learned so much from them to be like, let's just stop and think about this before we actually say yes. And that's, I would say this is for me personally, and probably the other upholders out there, the challenge is not to motivate, the challenge is not to do too much and then kill yourself. Working too hard, working yourself to death.
Right. So it's not really a challenge getting motivated. It's overwhelming yourself is maybe the...
Right. And that's the other piece to think about, that is that there is power and boundaries in saying no. As much as motivating is important, we have to balance both sides of those things. I'm a doer, so the not doing is something I'm always having to think about balancing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important, just in understanding yourself. The practice of yoga, I mean, over whatever it is, the past century, yoga has sort of become synonymous with exercise and stretching and doing these fancy postures. But really, a yoga practice in its traditional sense is much more about just understanding yourself and realizing yourself. And the postures were a tool to help that happen.
Right.
And I think this talk today and, just this idea of starting with understanding yourself a little bit better before you start to go out and do all the other things. I think that's a really great step in that process.
Totally. I mean, it's like people always say there's nothing that's not yoga. Everything that we're doing is yoga. It's all about the self, you know. Shannon had asked, can you be a mix? I think yes, but I would encourage you to listen to the podcast about your particular type, because you might be surprised at what it means. The words themselves sound like they mean certain things, but it can be definitely different than that. The thing about the practice of asana that is so important is that it's about yoga is the journey of the self, through the self, to the self, all that stuff. But we can't do it without the practice. Most of us are not at capacity, just like the old school stories about how the sages couldn't sit in meditation for long enough to achieve enlightenment, so they had to like fix their bum hip. It's the same thing. I think the speed of the way that we live is different, but it's that we can't do it unless we do the physical work. I don't know anybody that hasn't done the practice of yoga that can sit comfortably with themselves.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So the asana becomes, I think as it was intended, it's a tool to help you on that journey.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
Great talk today. So again, Sara Curry, she's the owner of Blaze Yoga and Pilates in New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And if you haven't already, definitely check out her TED Talk on yoga and recovery. And with the quiz that we were talking about is the 4 Tendencies quiz by Gretchen Rubin. And you should definitely check that out. You can just Google it and take the quiz, listen to is it a podcast?
The podcast.
Personality type? Yeah.
So 20 minutes. It's not long.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us, Sara.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you guys.
Thanks for joining, everyone. For more great interviews, online yoga classes, and events, come check us out at yogafactory.com.